So, if you're trying to understand why your newborn is losing weight, this video is for you. Today, I'm going to discuss weight loss in the newborn, what is normal, what we watch for as providers, and when supplementation might be suggested for your newborn. So, the first thing I want to talk about is what is normal weight loss for a newborn. Newborns typically lose between 5 to 10% of their birth weight, and their weight loss usually peaks between day 3 to 5. The expectation is that weight loss usually resolves and they're back up to their birth weight between 1 to 2 weeks after they're born. So it's something that is expected, temporary, and resolves within 1 to 2 weeks. So, another question that I get a lot of times is why is weight loss more significant sometimes with babies that are exclusively breastfed? Well, in the beginning, breastfed babies are getting what's called colostrum. So, it's also a small amount. So until that mature until that more mature milk comes in between day 3 to 5, typically they're going to lose more weight because they're not taking in as much volume. Another thing or reason why breastfed babies might lose more weight is that milk transfer is dependent upon a good latch. That's why lactation support is very important for breastfed babies because a good latch equals good transfer typically, and sometimes that can also help prevent the more significant weight loss that sometimes happens with breastfed babies. If you have a good latch, but it's painful, I also want you to ask your newborn providers to evaluate your baby for a tongue tie. Because if your baby has a tongue tie, even though they have a good latch, that can still affect their ability to effectively transfer milk and lead to that more significant weight loss. So when it comes to newborn weight loss, what are we actually looking for? Typically, your baby is weighed once a day, and we compare the current weight with the birth weight to come up with the percentage of weight loss. So as I mentioned before, if your baby stays within that 5 to 10% range, that is typically normal. So we also monitor wet diapers and dirty diapers. So for wet diapers, we usually like to see the same number of wet diapers as days old that your baby is. So for example, if your baby is 1 day old, we like to see one wet diaper, or I should say we like to see at least one wet diaper in the first 24-hour period. If your baby is peeing more than that, then that is fine. But these are the minimums that we're talking about. So day 2, 2 wet diapers in the same 24-hour period. And so on until around day 3 to 5, as your milk supply increases, you want to be able to see at a minimum of 5 wet diapers, but typically you're going to see 8 or more wet diapers once your milk supply increases or your baby starts taking in more volume when they are formula fed. So the other thing that we watch out for is how much your baby is eating. Now with breastfeeding, we can't really tell exactly the amount that your baby is getting, but with formula feeding and weight loss, we look at the number of milliliters that your baby is taking in. So if your baby is formula fed, your baby should gradually start taking in more volume over as they get older, day by day. So usually we start out with smaller amounts because we don't want your baby to be spitting up, because that's what happens if your baby takes in too much volume, is they're going to be having issues with spitting up. That is not reflux, that is a volume issue. If your baby is spitting up, look at how much milk your baby is drinking, and if they're taking in larger volumes, talk to your provider about giving you guidance on how to gradually increase that amount. As I mentioned before, we also look for things like tongue ties, lip ties, even cheek ties that can affect latch and breastfed babies' ability to transfer milk. So when we're doing our physical exam, we do look in the mouth and look for these things that can affect the baby's ability to get an effective latch, which is important because not only can it affect your baby's weight loss, but it can affect your milk supply long term. So these are all important things to monitor and evaluate in the first few days. So if treatment is needed, that we can give you the um, information that you need for treatment. If your baby is very sleepy, they might not be taking in enough volume, which can also lead to more significant weight loss in the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about when supplementation might be suggested for your baby with weight loss. If your baby goes over that 10% weight loss mark, that is typically when the conversation about supplementation might come up. If your baby is born in the hospital, there are typically protocols in place that address newborn weight loss. So you might even hear supplementation being suggested before your baby reaches that 10% weight loss mark, because protocols tend to be proactive when it comes to weight loss. So I want to encourage you to know what is normal. And if your baby is within that normal range, have a conversation with your provider. If your desire is to exclusively breastfeed, what your options are to help to get a plan or a feeding plan together to address the weight loss. Most hospitals have lactation consultants, and even if your baby is born outside of the hospital at home, you have a doula or a lactation consultant that can help you to come up with a feeding plan to um, help with weight loss. Some hospitals even offer donor breast milk if you're open to that. So just have a conversation, see what's available, and make a shared decision about formula feeding or supplementing if needed, and your desire is to exclusively breastfeed. Newborn weight loss is something that is very temporary, something that is treated over time with the expectation of back to birth weight by 1 or 2 weeks. So you have time. We just kind of want to see that weight loss peak between day 3 to 5 and start heading back up to birth weight. In the beginning, feeding decisions are not always simple. And if supplementation is needed temporarily, that does not mean that you have failed. That means that you are learning and adjusting to what your baby needs in real time. Newborn care made simple.